Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you so much, Jim, for the invitation, Peggy for organising. Thank you to you all for being here so early in the morning, and not many of you in your pajamas or anything like that. So I'm very, very impressed. And I just want to do a bit of a shout out and say that I'm very fortunate to speak at many different Rotary clubs, but I get a really nice feeling with this group. So I've been fortunate to spend time listening to conversations for the last maybe half an hour, a little bit further, and I can really tell that you gel well together. And I just wanted to offer that up, straight away. What I'm going to do now is share my screen. So fingers crossed it works. Here goes. And tell me if you can see my screen, everyone. Can you see?
Yep. We can.
Okay. So remind me, Jim, how much time we have so that I can time and allow time.
We have a total of about 45 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So thanks, everybody. So the title of the talk is called Beyond Victims or Perpetrators, Engaging Young People Positively in Peace Work. Basically, I want to give a sense of how do we engage young people positively in peace building, and the beyond victims and perpetrators part relates to how we generally look at young people. There's research to show that we generally look at young people in terms of problems to be solved, and we know a lot less about them in terms of agents for peace, in terms of how do they go about resolving some of the big pressing challenges that we have. But before doing that, I want to do a big shout out, and I hope, Jim, Peggy, I got some pictures of you. I wanted to do a shout out. Thank you, Jim. And it's also great to see Tom on the call as well. Been very, very fortunate to get to know both Jim and Tom through the course that I'm involved with for World Beyond War. So I'll just say a little bit about World Beyond War very, very quickly. So World Beyond War is a global organization. We have membership in 175 countries, and our main remit is we're against war, not just war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, but against the war system. And we're against the war system in the sense that lots of money is spent each year preparing for war or going to war, when really it would be much better spent, especially now, but actually always, in being invested in other things to support basic human needs, such as health, such as education, etc., etc. So not only the human cost of how many people die, but also the environmental and the economic cost as well. The way in which we do that is through education. So we run online courses, and Jim and Tom have just been on War Abolition 201. And heads up, we've got another course that we're putting together right now, which should be very, very interesting, called War and the Environment. So the interlinkages between war and climate change. The last course that Jim and Tom were on had 146 people on, from age 13 to 85, from South Sudan, Philippines, South Korea, right through to North America and Europe. While I was waiting, I wanted to say thank you to you all as well. So I hopefully got a nice picture of you all. Thank you to you all for being here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a complete honor to be here with you today. I always think it's a great way to start off by showing appreciation, and part of my appreciation is in a sense an opportunity to say thank you to Rotary as well, because as Jim mentioned, I am a Rotary Peace Fellow. When I was putting together this particular session today, Jim also asked me to say a little bit about my background as a Rotary Peace Fellow, so I'm going to do that. So where are we going? Here's what we have planned. So basically, I want to start off by giving a little bit of an overview of my background, how I become involved as a Rotary Peace Fellow, and also how I've been involved with Rotary ever since. So I was a Rotary Peace Fellow in 2012, which is a long time ago. Ever since that, I've been fortunate to work on projects with Rotarians in many different countries, and been invited to speak at many different Rotary district events, district conferences. I was also invited by Rotary International Evanston to go to South Korea and speak about Rotary and Rotary Peace Fellowship work in the area of peace a couple of years back, and I think there was about 45,000 Rotarians there. I'm going to talk about that very briefly. The main bulk of the conversation will be looking at this idea of youth peace building. What do we mean by youth peace building? And I'm going to say a little bit about what we mean by youth, what we mean by peace and Rotary, and how I think they're a brilliant connection and they should be interlinked. Already there's some great work being done, and I think actually there's ways in which we could improve moving forward in terms of all the great work that's being done. To that end, over the years, since 2012, since I've been working with Rotarians on projects, I've been developing in collaboration and a model of engaging young people in peace work, but does it in such a way where Rotarians are involved, both through financing projects, but also becoming mentors and allies, and also as a way for engaging the broader community in this work as well. In doing so, I'll say something about, well, what should young people be learning if they want to become effective peace builders? What content and what processes do they need to be introduced to in order to work effectively for peace? And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the kind of key messages and lessons learned that I found through this work. And finally, I want to leave it open because many of these talks that I'm on with Rotarians, they always ask me at the end, okay, so what can we do now? So I've got 3 concrete ways in which Rotarians can get involved kind of straight away with some of this work. And we'll come to that at the end. And I want to leave a bit of time for question and answers because I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Phil, could you just tell briefly your academic background, because it's quite impressive?
I can. Here it is. So I want to give you a bit of a heads up that part of this presentation was kind of drawn from a presentation that I did just before lockdown, actually, at the University of Cambridge. And they asked me as well to give a bit of background on my professional academic background. And it broadly falls into 4 different areas. The first 10 years of my career, I was a youth worker and a therapist. So I was nodding away and thinking, what amazing work you're doing with regards to mental health, by the way. So I'm a trained psychotherapist. I've worked with many clients from all ages, but more recently I've trained many counselors, many psychotherapists, many psychiatrists to work in their profession as well. So if there's any way that I can be involved in any of the mental health work, although I've been very much with my peace hat on over the more recent years, I'm still very much interested in this area of mental health. My first degree, Youth and Community Studies, worked for the government for 10 years as a youth worker and a therapist. Then I trained as a teacher, did my postgrads and my masters in education and training, and worked as a consultant training teachers, training youth workers, social workers, police, and other people in the helping profession to work more effectively with young people. I also taught at colleges and universities. I worked with people with learning differences and learning difficulties as well. 10 years, actually 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I wanted to kind of see a bit of the world. And in doing so in 2009, I after saving my money up for about 2 years, and I put my hands up, I'm so privileged to do that and recognize my own privileges, that I saved up my money and went traveling for a year throughout Central South America and Southeast Asia, going through about 20 odd countries. In doing so, I've seen amazing, amazing things, but also in doing so, I came back and I started to think, how could I utilize some of my skills as a youth and community practitioner, counselor, psychotherapist, and educator to work for peace and conflict resolution? At that time, I never even knew there was a field called peace and conflict. But I actually came across the Rotary Peace Fellowship. But I just want to put, and I'll say something about the Peace Fellowship as well, but I just wanted to share something with you as well. And it's in a sense sharing my vulnerability, because although I've done these things, I left school with no qualifications. As soon as I left school, I went to work as a butcher, training butcher, would you believe? And actually I'm dyslexic as well. So I found out many of these challenges, not in school, but as I went away and tried a different approach to education. So part of my idea for becoming a youth worker and becoming an educator was to try and facilitate education in a different way from what I've experienced. So I didn't find out as dyslexic until I was about 23, actually. So fast forward to 2012, I was fortunate to become a Rotary Peace Fellow, and Jim, Tom, and many others can talk a lot more about the Rotary Peace Fellowship. But as you know, the whole idea of Rotary, part of the broader mission of Rotary, to increase goodwill, peace, and understanding. They think one of the best ways of doing that is to train experts in the area of peace and conflict. And they have two offerings. One is the Master's Program for people that are just getting started into the peace and conflict world. And then also, and you can do the Masters in England, which Bradford, the biggest peace studies department in the world, Uppsala in Sweden, ICU Japan, Queensland in Australia, and Duke, North Carolina in the US. And then they have a professional development program as well, which is for senior level practitioners who are already working in the field, which was what I was fortunate to do. And it's a 3-month program in Chulalongkorn, Thailand. Although having said that, they now have a second program in Makerere University in Uganda. And it's actually, they're changing it to be a year program. So there'll be in person as well as virtual. And again, I could talk a lot more about this, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a quick overview. So since 2012, I did my doctorate, and I did it in the area of youth peace building. And I did it in the area of a particular approach. How do we involve young people in research rather than doing research about them? And I did, so that's what I did my PhD in. I wrote a book called Peace and Conflict in Bolivia, which had 9 chapters, and I wrote 6 of them. I'm now editing the latest version of the World Beyond War book, and I'm also writing another book as well. So many things. One of the things that I've always tried to do, and Stacey, if you're listening here, it would be a great bit of advice. I've always never just studied. I've always tried to mix practice and the academic study. Why? Because there is a role for theory, there is a role for academics, but there's also a role for practice as well. And if you're doing both, you can understand both a little bit better. So practice should inform thinking and theory and research and vice versa. So I've always tried to marry the both up. It's been a challenge, but I've always managed to do it. And I'm also very interested in this idea of both inner and outer change. So becoming a peace builder, part of it involves turning the mirror on yourself. And you know, as Gandhi would say, be the change you want to see in the world. So how can we as ourselves be better practitioners or peace builders in our everyday environment? But also being, let's say, Dalai Lama and meditating, you know, on your seat at home, and being in inner peace is necessary but not sufficient. So how do we go about changing some of the structural conditions to try and address forms of violence in the community? So we need to do both inner and outer peace, both inner and outer change. So hopefully that gives a little bit, thank you for the question, a little bit of my background. I wanted to kind of scoot through that quick. If people are interested more recently, and I spoke to Jim and Tom about this and others about this the other day, I was recently interviewed on a podcast by PCDN. And you can go to PCDN and put in PhILL Gittins, but they basically wanted to interview me about my career development and what brought me to do the work that I do. So if people are interested, please go and listen to the podcast. So having given a bit of background, this is my main kind of argument, and I wanted to kind of try and develop the argument with you. Engaging, educating, and equipping young people as peace builders is one of the largest, most global and important challenges facing humanity. It's even more important now for a couple of reasons. Let's think about youth. So why youth? Youth already are involved in discussions about peace and security. On one side, as I kind of mentioned before, they're driving positive change. On the other side, actually they're blamed for a lot of the problems, you know, that for a lot of the issues related to violence. So part of our task is to try and engage them more effectively in peace work. Now we have more young people on the planet in the whole history of humanity. The youth demographic of 15 to 24 is the largest and the fastest demographic par none. So actually what's happening is that we're actually having more young people on the planet and actually more older people on the planet as well. So part of the wonderful thing that we need to do is get young people and older people working together on projects. And I'm going to say something about that shortly. So it's not just about young people. It's about young people and adults working together on projects. Why peace? Peace, as you know, is a focal area of Rotary. So it's, peace, conflict prevention and conflict resolution, but peace and development are also interlinked as well. So the UN, ex-UN Secretary General said there can be no sustainable development without peace. There can be no peace without sustainable development. So why is that? So the latest sustainable development goals, which are the global goals, which all governments in every single country should be working to between 2015 and 2030, have as one of its goals 16, which is peace. They never used to. The goals before that were the Millennium Development Goals. And they did massive research from 2000 to 2015 to find out why aren't many countries meeting their goals. And there used to be a lot less goals, by the way. And actually the World Bank, among others, found that the #1 reason for why governments are not achieving their goals is violence. Where there's violence, it attracts attention away from things like sanitation, from health, from quality education. So in order to address all of these goals you see here, we have to address the issue of violence. And in doing so, we have to address the issue of peace. So peace, although it's one of the goals, it's a cross-cutting theme through all of them. Another thing to say about peace is that there's been a democratization in peace. In the past, we used to think of it's the role of the United Nations, to help bring about peace or to end war. We now know that that is not the case. The United Nations has a role to play, but actually everybody has a role to play in bringing about peace. And I want to say a bit of a shout out now to Rotary. I think Rotary is a wonderful platform and actually has a very unique position to play in building peace. United Nations are quite elite level. Rotary can mix with elite level and top level, but they also can very much engage with the grassroots level as well on the ground. So they can do up work from grassroots to elite level, but also engage with people at the elite level and government level as well. So I think Rotary has a very, very unique role to play in building peace. So Rotary are already doing some great work in the area of peace. And here is some that I thought of in terms of, I thought it might be useful to put together, kind of a crazy quilt to kind of list some of the ways in which Rotary are already involved with peace. So you have, as you know, Rotary were there in terms of the setting up the United Nations. Rotary is the biggest, highest consultative, holds the biggest, highest consultative status with the United Nations, bar none. They have the Rotary Peace Centres, Rotary Peace Fellows, Rotary Action Group for Peace, Peace Builder District Clubs. We have other partners that are working with Rotary under this umbrella, such as Mediators Without Borders, Outward Bound, New Gen Peace Builders, which is the organisation I used to be part of and helped develop. And of course, Jim, Tom, and many others will know we have the great relationship with the Institute for Economics and Peace and all the great work that's happening with regards to that. However, I still don't think there's a strategic model, or as strategic as what it could be, to try and engage more Rotarians in this kind of work. So what would happen? Just ask ourselves, what would happen if we had 1 million civilian peace builders? So I'm talking about Rotary here. Actually 1,200,000, right? So it was the last count. How do we go about engaging these as, peace builders? Is the question that we're going to hopefully try and think about or explore. So there's a little bit about youth, a little bit about peace, and a little bit about Rotary. So what do we mean by peace building? Because some people might be thinking, well, what do you mean by youth? What do you mean by peace building? Here is one definition, and I like this one. Any and all activities to reduce conflict and pursue peace by peaceful means. So Jim and Tom, who have been on the course, they will kind of recognize this idea of pursue peace by peaceful means. So the means and the ends just, are coherent. So Gandhi used to talk about the means and the ends. So does it look like this? Yeah, it could look like peacekeeping. Does it look like this? Yeah, it could look like kind of peacemaking with ourselves, meditation. This is an actual picture, by the way, in Thailand. And I was in Thailand one time being asked to do a similar talk like I am now. And I said, is that real? And somebody put their hand up and went, yeah. And I actually got involved with organizing this. 1 million people, young people meditating for peace. So it looks like that as well. Does it look like this? I've lived for more than 5 years on the ground as a practitioner in Bolivia. Protests and getting out on the streets as a way of bringing about social change, but through peaceful means. So does peace building look like that? Yes, it does. But peace building also looks like this. You know, it looks like relationships. And I put here, peace at the end of the day, although it's very complex, it's about relationships. And peace at the end of the day, although we have the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, we have policy frameworks, we have guidance, peace is inevitably a local challenge. So I've heard some great responses of how you as Rotarians are responding to challenges around mental health, which is obviously connected to peace as well at the local level. So we have to think, what does peace look like on the local level? So close your eyes. Can I ask you to close your eyes a moment? Let's close our eyes and think about, who do we think about when we think of a peace builder role model? Okay. And maybe when you open your eyes, you might have thought of people like this. Maybe, or maybe not. And you might have thought about people like this. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that we don't tend to think of young people as peace builders as much as what we do with some of the other great names that we hear here. And another thing to mention is that I think there's a massive youth movement right now around climate change, and they're doing some great work. The youth peace builder movement is not as strong. So the challenge that we're confronted with is, how do we mobilize more young people to get involved as peace builders? So there's part of the challenge. Here's something that I see as some of the challenges moving forward. So think about young people. As I mentioned before, and I've wrote about this quite a lot, some of the things I'm going to say here is that when we think of young people, the role of young people, we tend to think of them in 3 different ways. Young people as perpetrators of violence. There's definitely research and a lot done around that issue, and that's true. Secondly, young people as victims of violence. So that is also true as well. Research shows that young people, as well as women, etc., are among the most vulnerable people and often on the receiving end of conflict and violence on a disproportionate scale. That is true. Young people as peace builders, we know a lot less about. And actually there's been recognition from the international community about that. In 2015, the United Nations has brought out a new resolution called 2250, which basically says that all governments need to step up their game and involve young people more in peace building work. Also linked to that is this idea of early intervention programs. So rather than reacting to violence and extremism, governments and then obviously local authorities and districts, etc., need to be investing more funding, money, but also human resources in terms of programs such as peace education, training young people to be peace builders and peace education. When we look at peace, there's a few things missing as well that we have challenges. One is that if peace is, and all governments talk about the importance of peace, bar none, why don't we have it? And I'm sure Tom, could say a lot about this as well. Why don't we have it in the schools? Why aren't we teaching in the schools? Why aren't we teaching it in universities? There's a real lack of this. And even where they are teaching it, there's a lack of education and action. What I mean by that is taking learning from the classroom and then putting that learning to action in the community. There's not many examples of that either. I can tell you now that I was interviewed last week by a coalition, Cambridge University, a big NGO here in England, and the British Council have done some research in 2018 where they reached out to 100,000 people in more than 10 countries to find out what government should be investing in. Number 2, peace education came out. And this was to come out in 2018. So now they're doing some research. What should peace education look like in different contexts? And that's what I was interviewed about, to give my perspective on what I think it should look like. Rotary. What are some of the opportunities and challenges that I hear when speaking to Rotary in many different places, in many different contexts? I think there's a few common challenges. One, pretty much across the board, Rotarians are interested in getting youth involved in projects. Two, pretty much across the board, Rotarians are interested in growing membership. How do we get more Rotarians involved? And I can tell you now from the high up, there's a big concern about this. You know, through speaking to trustees and things like this, there's a big concern that sometimes Rotary is losing members. So how can we change this? And then the third thing is, you are people of action. How do we maximize that action, you know, and maximize the impact? So hopefully I've give a little bit of detail. I want to now present a model which we have found, because I've done this in collaboration with many, many different Rotarians and Rotary Peace Fellows and communities, that we found well to work, that engages young people as peace builders, that incorporates both education and action, that includes peace projects where young people lead the project, but adults guide, so mentors guide the process. And in the process of doing so, Rotarians, they get young people involved, Rotarians act as allies. They recruit membership as well, because this has been proven that when community members get involved with this work, they have later become Rotarians. And also I'll say something about the impact. Here it is. So I'm going to try and explain this in 3 different stages, but the idea is, how do we put young people at the center of peace work? And when I say peace work, I mean research, education, action, and advocacy. The model actually has 3 parts. You've got young people in the middle. On the outside, you've got local community. So this is where Rotarians would get involved. And then on the outside is practitioners, scholars, policymakers. So we've done some work with Rotarians that engages all 3. Let me say a little bit about it. So the young people. What we do, this is how the model works, is that we engage young people to start with and communities in research, finding out what should peace building look like in different communities, because it'll look different in Bolivia, it'll look different in different parts of Bolivia than what it looked like in Colombia, for example, you know, where I've worked. We use that then to contextualize what education should look like. So, for example, Houston did some projects with Rotarians in Houston. Human trafficking was a massive issue. So we need to make sure that we address human trafficking there. Bolivia, violence against women, massive issue there. So we need to make sure we do issues. Colombia, civil war, needed to make sure we address that. Action part is where young people take what they've done in the community, in the classroom, and put together peace projects. So far, since 2013, I've been involved in overseeing and providing oversight management for probably about 20 youth-led peace projects in different countries. The advocacy part at the end is where young people and Rotarians have an opportunity to showcase their work to the community. To give you one example, in Argentina, we did a project, 2 projects, and the end celebration was attended by 800 people. 500 the first time, 300 the second. The mayor, head of district in terms of the education system, etc., high up Rotarians, etc., attended. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, what does that look like, Phil, in practice? Well, here's 3 examples of what it looks like in practice. One, we have something called a Peace Project Incubator, which is a 2-day workshop. The first day, so 9 till 4, the first day will basically introduce young people. I think I spoke to Jim and Tom about this before. We'll introduce young people and Rotarians to the basics of peace building. The second day will be about incubating a peace project idea. So how do we design, implement, evaluate a peace project? And then what happens, the young people over the next 2-3 months go and do the project and are mentored by Rotarians to do the project, while we, or me, or whoever it is, would provide oversight management from afar, virtually. We've done projects, one in Houston, where we did this with 200 young people from 35 schools. So the Rotarians recruited all the students, recruited all the Rotarians to be trained. And before we did the 2-day training, we did a half-day training with Rotarians to train them in how to act as conversation leaders, but also project mentors as well. The second model is the one that I've done many of, 3 months, which is an extra curriculum where we work with schools and universities, and we run workshops on a Friday and Saturday for 2 or 3 weeks. So about 5 or 6 workshops. So it's quite intense. And then they have up to 2 months to do the projects, and they receive mentoring, and then it culminates in a community celebration. So I've done many of these in the US, Bolivia, and Argentina. And then the other one I'm working on right now that I've just got agreement from a school here, is called a whole school approach, where the school dedicates their term to a particular theme. And fortunate enough, and actually the school is the one that I used to go to, because I've just come back to England. I didn't mention this actually, but I just come back to England from working on the ground for many years last November. So in doing so, I reached out to the school and they said, yeah, we definitely want this. So what we're doing is that we're training 100 teachers in the fundamentals of peace building, and then they will do classes throughout the term related to peace, conflict. We'll be doing things along the lines of the Institute for Economics and Peace, how do you measure peace in your context, etc. This will be happening in October. And they have something called a Pathways Week, which is where they can dedicate just a week to a particular theme as well. And I remember speaking to the head teacher, and she said, and Phil, the thing is, teachers hate it because they never know what to do with the young people. They said, but you'll be able to do it all, right? And yeah, so we're doing a two-day peace project incubator with year 9, which is, I was trying to think in terms of the US, which is like 14, 15-year-olds, 217 people in that one. And then the year 10, 15 to 16-year-olds, 276 in that one, with year 9 and year 10. So that's already in place. Here's some examples of some project. Here's one in Bolivia that we've done. We've done also working alongside the United Nations. So this is a project with the United Nations. The United Nations has their Model UN. And basically they called me and said, Phil, it'd be great as part of the Model UN, could you do something on peace? Look, enabling students. So we got 46 young leaders here that are involved in this for a 1-day kind of introduction to peace work that could look at issues through a peace lens. Here's some that I've done many in the US, such as 2 in Charlottesville. Here's 1 in Houston with 200 young people and Rotarians, etc. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Here is Brazil, 200 and something faculty, where I did a long extended talk. Turkey, we've done examples. Colombia, I did a 2-week kind of training for young leaders in Colombia, in Bogota. Argentina, with another Rotary Peace Fellow here on the right-hand side, Patricia Schaefer, who's a wonderful peace builder, and I was asked to help start New Gen Peace Builders with her. Here's some young people doing some activities. So what happens in the classroom? I want to say something about that. Well, what do people learn? So I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of, what happens in the classroom. Well, I like to think of something called significant learning, and this is different to a lot of education works just the head part and misses out on the development of the whole person. I think peace building should really work the head, the heart, the hands. And you're probably thinking, is this a mistake, or do they really have Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head in the corner here? Well, I do. Let me explain why that is. I often have used this kind of saying with students or people that I've worked with, that if after you finish this educational journey with us, if you walk out of this educational experience like Mrs. or Mr. Potato Head, we have done you a disjustice. Why? Because you will be all head and no heart. You will be all head and walk out of balance. What we need to make sure is that we've got young people and communities who are intellectually developed, head-wise, but also kind, caring human beings, heart, but also active human beings as well, that know how to engage in this work. So I think good education should involve the head, the heart, the hands. I think in terms of education, we should think of what content is both timely and timeless. So what I mean by that is conflict is something that that every single person on the planet, bar none, will have to engage with in their lifetime, bar none. Conflict is not bad. Conflict is just is. The challenge is how we deal with conflict. Do we deal with it in violent ways, or do we deal with it in non-violent ways? So we should be working with students, young people, communities to help them understand conflict. And there's three parts to every single conflict: attitudes, behaviors, and contradictions. We should also be introducing, and Jim and Tom and others can talk a lot about this, negative and positive peace. Negative peace is not bad in itself. Negative is about stopping direct violence, psychological violence, but that is necessary but not sufficient, because if we're not fighting, if there's no fighting in Syria or no fighting between human beings, there's one form of peace, but it doesn't mean that we have good relationships, healthy relationships. It doesn't mean that we have the presence of justice and things like this, and what we're seeing right now in terms of the world, what's going on. So we need both negative peace and positive peace. And here's a little bit about the different forms of violence. And again, I can talk more about this, but I don't want to preach to the choir, but there's different ways of understanding violence. Direct violence is what you see physically. Structural violence is the policies and procedures that are put in place to privilege some groups over another. Cultural violence is the things such as fascism, isms, sexism, etc. 100% more people around the planet die through structural violence, a lot more than they do direct violence. There's an argument which Galton, who is actually known as one of the fathers of peace studies, would argue that in some way all of us are a little bit violent in terms of cultural violence. We all have our own kind of ways of seeing the world. So it's important that we recognize this and do something about it. And he would make an argument that we start off with this way of thinking, the attitude, a way of seeing the world, or way of seeing a person or a group, cultural violence, which then informs structural violence, because we think that, oh, this group is not as good as us, so we're going to put this policy in place. Structural violence. Then people are not obviously happy about being discriminated against, so they do something about it. Direct violence. So it starts with cultural, moves on to structural, and then leads to direct violence. Not always, but I think it's a useful way of framing things. We also in the classroom enable people to understand a conflict, because in order to understand a conflict, in order to address a conflict, respond to a conflict, we need to understand some of the different moving parts. I'm just putting my charger in. We need to understand some of the different moving parts. And there's many different lenses that you can use to analyze a conflict. One is a conflict tree, where you understand the root cause of the issue and the effects. So think about what's happening now in terms of racism around the world. With, you know, what's the root causes of this? What are some of the effects that we're seeing? Here's an example here, working with university students in the Virginia area, where they're working through a conflict tree. And what you see on the pieces of paper are a statement, and they'll have to decide if that statement is a root cause or an effect. So it's all about thinking through. Another way of thinking through is a concept mapping, where you have a conflict and you think through, who is involved in this conflict? Where is the conflict taking place? What is happening in the conflict? Why is the conflict occurring? And in a sense, that the question of why is the most important question. You know, why is conflict occurring? That the question of why, the question of purpose, is the most important. Here's one of our young people presenting their concept maps. This is in Charlottesville. So I was in Charlottesville a month after everything happened, you know, a couple of years back, which was an interesting place to be at that time. Here's some young people here working through a concept map to give you an idea of what that looks like. So while the young people are doing this, the community and Rotarians that we trained would act as a conversation leader on each particular table and facilitate the conversations. Here's on the left-hand side, the Rotarians, wonderful Rotarians, actually, these two on the left-hand side, wonderful Rotarians, such brilliant mentors. And here they are working through the process of understanding different forms of violence, where young people have a card and they have to think, oh, is that direct violence, or is that structural violence? Is that cultural violence? Yeah, they're great Rotarians. We also look at the issue of war. and German Tom and others will be able to talk about this, looks at the myths of war. You know, the fact that people think, well, war's inevitable, war is natural, you know, war is just. We actually expose people to the myths of war, that none of these are actually true. You know, war is very, very detrimental on all levels, and there's no such thing as a just war. We also do something called a peace and violence spectrum to ask them a question. So over the last 50 years or 20 years or 10 years or wherever, do you think the world has become more peaceful or less peaceful? And then we get them to stand on the line and they tell us, well, I think this, you know, it's become more peaceful or more violent because of this. Starting with perspectives. Then, and German Tom can talk about this, then we introduce them to the data. What does the research show? And we do this by introducing to the Global Peace Index, by telling them the criteria in terms of the 23 indicators, in terms of the 3 broad categories, and then asking them. I've got put here, guess the UK, because I've done another presentation, but we'll say, guess the US. You know, where do you think the US is? And why do you think that is? So the part of the reason for this is that to work with the tension, the dilemma between perspectives and data, you know, which data should inevitably drive our decision making. And here we are, the positive piece. And Jim, I could talk a lot about this, but I don't want to, because I guess you could talk a lot about this in another one. So I just wanted to introduce it. The other thing that we do as well is that we have 1 or 2 days, and this, Bill, and the great work that you've done around mental health and others, this really looks at the development of the human being. You know, how do we be in peace with ourselves? How do we be in peace with others? So we introduce them to techniques and tools. And this is drawn from my background in therapy and psychotherapy. How do we mindfulness? How do we actively listen to other people? Because when we can actively listen to other people, we can help generate better relationships. And as we know, relationships are at the center of peace building work. We ask them to think about multiple reflections in terms of writing on a balloon, one thing they care about and one thing they're worried about in their context, as a way to start thinking about how to do a project. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the process that they go through. In terms of doing the peace projects in the community, we have a 10-step plan that they use, which moves right from how do we identify the problem through to what should the project be, who's going to be involved, roles and responsibilities, milestones, how you're going to evaluate the project, etc. And then, as you know, it culminates in a community celebration. And I've give one example. Just to give examples of some of the other projects. So we've had projects around, many around mental health, by the way, many around mental health. In Argentina, we had a massive issue around drink driving and violence. So we did projects working with the Red Cross. All of the projects engage and have certain kind of guiding principles. One is that nothing about us without us. What I mean by that is that when the community is doing their projects in the first week, they have to go out to the community and test their ideas with the community and listen to them with regards to whether this project is needed and viable. I can tell you now, because I've read a lot about this and I've been involved with a lot of projects on the ground, international peace work is sometimes causes a lot of the problems than actually some of the solutions, by imposing outside ideas of what they think is needed. So we have this idea of nothing about us without us. Go out into the community, listen to them, and respond to what they think is needed. Other ideas, so in Bolivia, we've done human rights issues, where some of the young people we worked with, university students, went then into schools and taught human rights in many different schools. We've had machismo, gender violence in Bolivia as well. In US, we've also had political polarization. And this was an amazing project, actually, in Charlottesville, where the young people took what they learned and they put on a community event where at the time there's Trump and not Trump, the other side. And they found that different parties were not talking to each other. You know, they might not agree, but isn't it better that we get people engaging in conversation to try and see different perspectives? So they put together a community event where they invited somebody from one party, somebody from another party, to explain their political party views. Before doing that, they themselves facilitated a session around active listening and how we go about facilitating active listening. And then after the political parties had presented their views, they had facilitated discussions around different political parties' views. So I just wanted to give you a sense there. I could talk a lot more about that. So I spoke about the young people, but the really, really important part here is how do you engage the community around this? How are Rotarians involved? Well, Rotarians are involved and the community in terms of financing the projects. Many of the projects I've worked with have been 99%, 95% of the project worked on have been financed by Rotarians through district grants and global grants. Rotarians recruit all the students and all the schools and all the adult mentors to be involved as mentors. Rotarians act as mentors as the young people do their projects. Rotarians and other community members organize the end of community event, of course in collaboration with us and through support, etc. with us, but they do that. So that's how the community get involved. And then, okay, so the broader idea is young people, Rotary, but the broader community in terms of the practitioners, scholarly community. How can we get some of these, you know, broader community involved? Because I think Rotary, as I said before, have a great role to play at different levels of community. I want to say something about the material. Well, where does this material come from? Who decides what is good peace education? Well, this is where we draw from our work at World Beyond War, which I've said before. 175 membership in 175 countries. Our educational work, so we don't just draw from World Beyond War, but our educational work won, as one of 10 organizations around the world, won the Global Educators Challenge Award, awarded by the Global Foundation, Global Educators Foundation, and the London School of Economics. And it was awarded to 10 organizations around the world based on their innovative approaches to educating young people and communities around global challenges such as war, the environment, peace, mental health, etc. So we draw from, obviously, the work that we do at World Beyond War. And our work was also informed by the Global Campaign for Peace Education. Before I come into post at World Beyond War, the ex-education director, Tony Jenkins, he is the global coordinator for the Global Campaign for Peace Education. So we draw from him. We also draw from the best of the Rotary Peace Centres, and also, yeah, from my work in my PhD as well, what I found to work in terms of peace education. So we draw from many tried and tested places.
Bill, we're at time. If you want to, just giving you a little bit of a heads up, if you want to try to leave some time for questions.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, thank you. And I'm coming right to the end here. So here are the 3 key messages to take away. 1, focus on the process. So engage young people in the communities in all of the process, right from design, right from implementation, right through to evaluation. It should be a hybrid approach. What I mean by that is that we should introduce communities to ideas from outside, but it should also be context specific and address what the issues are in their community. 2, products. It should be impactful. So it's based on evaluations. We've seen a massive impact on young people, but I've seen truthfully a massive impact on Rotarians as well. I can tell you now, many Rotarians have come up to me. I remember one Rotarian, a couple actually, coming up to me. They've been Rotarians for 30 years, and one of them started crying and said, "I don't know about the young people, Phil, but this has been such an amazing experience for me." Community involvement and Rotary membership through this experience, I can tell you now, in most of the projects I've been involved with, the community members that weren't Rotarians before had become Rotarians after. Partnership relates to how all of these projects that I spoke about, we've always tried to get involved other Rotary Peace Fellows to do some of the teaching, Rotarians, government and civil society. And I think that's it. So in terms of next steps, I just want to highlight these 3 things. 1, the Rotary Global Peace Conference, and I can talk more about this or send you more information, but I'm involved with a massive undertaking, something called the Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association Global Cyber Peace Conference, a first in Rotary, never been done before, 24-hour peace conference. Over 100 speakers, and it's split up into 3 different zones. One is Asia Oceania, the one that I'm looking after is Africa, Middle East and Europe. And then the third one is the Americas and Caribbean. For our zone, I can tell you after this webinar today, I'm writing to the Rotary President International and potentially John Hugo, who is the Deputy Secretary General, to be one of our speakers. Right, Q&A. Oh, just before, so two other things as well that people want to know. Well, how can I get involved? One other is that we've got a course, upcoming course called War in the Environment. And then another one coming up probably in October called World War II. And then I've already got underway pilot projects. Argentina, Bolivia is a massive project that we already have Rotarians ready to go, that if any of your clubs or districts are interested in working on a global grant, they are ready and raring to go. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Thanks for the reminder. I know it. And please, yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your time. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if that's okay. Jim and Peggy, is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and please, yeah, any questions or thoughts, comments, critiques, whatever you would like to share.
I have a question. Is the course on the war and environment, is that an online course?
It is. It's an online course, a 6-week online course starting in July. Currently putting it together now. We have the framework, but I'm going through it now. But yes, it is. I can say something more about that if you wanted to know more, but I just, it's a 6-week course looking at the interlinkages between war and the environment, how war affects on the environment, but how the environment affects in war. So the two-way relationship. We have, as Jim and Tom will know, we have guest instructors for each particular week who are experts in the field. So far we have 4 accepted and they're really good instructors. And I'm reaching out to 2 others as we speak right now. We use a program called Canvas, which is where you will, and Jim and Tom know all about this, you will find all the material. You can also, the idea is also sharing and engaging together. So not just about reading the material. We have wonderful experts, you know, take our courses. So it's about learning from each other. And we also run as well. We run it last time and I think it's a great idea. So we're going to run it again. 3 Zoom calls as a way to engage people in discussions. Thanks for the question. Great question.
Yeah. So are regular Rotarians, can they sign up for this course?
Yeah, it's for everyone. It's from everyone. So we had Rotarians on the last course, people from 13 to 85 on the last course, by the way, and from very different professional backgrounds, from professors, PhDs, through to educators, activists, students. It's amazing. It is truthfully amazing, you know, how great it is. Yeah.
Bill, can you share your charts with us? Can we, you know, some of those are very, very helpful.
Yeah, I can share. Yeah.
Well, look forward to getting them. In my, you know, as one of the older people, I'm very off-put. It's off-putting when I hear about intolerance in academia with regard to definitions of violence, that any idea that I disagree with represents violence. And, you know, I'm sure there are other people feel the same way, but your definitions of violence were interesting and could be helpful in trying to be older and understanding that concept of violence.
Yeah. So is there a question in there for me to respond? Because I'm kind of nodding, and I think is there a question?
It was a extraneous commentary.
Okay, can I comment on that? If that's, I think you're right. I think part of the issue is that there's different ways of understanding violence, and there's different ways of understanding peace as well, as there is different ways of understanding love. So peace, it can be thought of as something called an essentially contested concept, which means it means different things to different people at different times. But this definition might be one useful way of looking at it. And in fact, actually, it's pretty much the universally accepted across the peace building field way of looking at things. But there's other different definitions. And if people are interested, I wrote a chapter on the theory of peace and violence that I share some other theories as well. And I can share that with you if you wanted me to.
I'd like to see it, but I really like to see the charts, but that additional commentary would be helpful to me.
Yeah, I promise I will send through the PowerPoints.
And we have been, Ken has graciously recorded this event, which we hope to be able to make available to those who couldn't join us today. So that coupled with your PowerPoint would be fabulous, Phil. Thank you so much.
No worries.
If you send them to me, I'll be happy to get them to everybody else that's interested.
Okay.
Phil, Brandon here from Vancouver. Tomorrow night, we're having a Zoom meeting about war and the environment. It's really relating to divestment of weapons and fossil fuel. And I'm going to mention this course that you mentioned, War and the Environment. I hardly have time to look it up before a meeting because I got to go to work, etc., and prepare for the meeting. But I think that will be very useful because our community has some work to do over the summer. Our township councillors have been very supportive, but we're building a coalition to get those investments through and of course, or those divestments through. But of course, that's just the first step. But thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Brendan. And are you already connected with us at World Beyond War?
Yes, I'm a member of the organizing committee in Vancouver. And okay. It's just been a tremendous resource for me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I was thinking like, ding, 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 you know, there must be many ways of being in contact. Well, good luck with your meeting tomorrow. And again, you know, please reach out to us. Greta is a complete superstar. So she will be very, very supportive. So good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Phil. I think it's obvious from your presentation and the passion that you show that, you know, your career choice now versus a butcher is probably the direction for you.